crucifixion of Jesus Christ is one of the most pivotal and impactful events in all of human history. For billions of Christians around the world, it represents the ultimate sacrifice, where the Son of God willingly gave his life to atone for the sins of humanity. However, the events surrounding the crucifixion have also been the subject of much debate and speculation over the centuries. Was the crucifixion a preordained divine plan, foretold by ancient Hebrew prophets? Or was it simply a political plot orchestrated by the religious and political authorities of the time to eliminate a perceived threat to their power and influence? These questions have vexed theologians, historians, and laypeople alike. Let's begin by examining the prophecies and foreshadowings of the crucifixion found in the Old Testament. One of the most prominent and widely cited is the passage from the book of Isaiah, chapter 53, which describes the suffering servant who would be despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering, and familiar with pain. This servant is said to be pierced for our transgressions and crushed for our iniquities. Many Christians see this as a clear and unmistakable prophecy of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, the Son of God who would willingly suffer and die to redeem humanity. The parallels between the description in Isaiah and the Gospel accounts of Jesus' passion and death are indeed striking. Other Old Testament passages that are often cited as prophetic of the crucifixion include the story of Abraham being called to sacrifice his son Isaac, which some interpret as a foreshadowing of God the Father sacrificing his own son. There are also references in the Psalms to the Messiah being pierced and having his hands and feet wounded, which seem to anticipate the specific methods of Jesus' execution. Furthermore, the institution of the Passover lamb in the book of Exodus, whose blood was to be spread on the doorframes of the Israelites' homes to protect them from the angel of death, is seen by many as a symbolic precursor to Jesus, the Lamb of God, whose blood would be shed to save humanity from the consequences of sin. These and other Old Testament passages have been interpreted by Christians over the centuries as clear evidence that the crucifixion of Jesus was part of a divine plan that had been foretold and foreshadowed long before it actually occurred. The argument is that the crucifixion was not simply a tragic historical event, but rather the fulfillment of a prophecy that had been woven into the very fabric of the Judeo-Christian scriptures. However, critics of this view argue that the connections between these Old Testament passages and the crucifixion of Jesus are often tenuous and based on selective reading and interpretation. They contend that the prophetic interpretations are anachronistic, reading later Christian beliefs and theological constructs back into the earlier texts. From this perspective, the apparent parallels between the Old Testament and the Gospels are more a case of Christians finding in the Hebrew Scriptures whatever they wanted or needed to support their evolving beliefs about the nature and significance of Jesus' death. The critics argue that the crucifixion was simply a historical event, not a preordained divine plan. So if the crucifixion was not a fulfillment of ancient prophecy, what then motivated its occurrence? Here, the alternative perspective is that the crucifixion was primarily a political plot orchestrated by the religious and political authorities of the time to eliminate a perceived threat to their power and influence. The Gospels make it clear that Jesus had drawn the ire of the Jewish religious leaders, particularly the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who saw him as a dangerous rabble-rouser and blasphemer. His teachings and actions, such as his frequent criticisms of the religious establishment and his claims of a special relationship with God, were viewed as a direct challenge to their authority and the traditional interpretations of the Mosaic Law. Additionally, the Roman authorities, particularly Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea, were concerned that Jesus' growing popularity and his ambiguous but seemingly political claims to be the King of the Jews could lead to unrest and potentially threaten Roman control over the region. From this perspective, the crucifixion was a calculated move by the Jewish and Roman powers that be to neutralize a perceived threat to their respective power structures. The Gospel accounts lend some support to this interpretation, as they depict the Jewish religious leaders actively plotting to have Jesus arrested and executed, and the Roman authorities ultimately sentencing him to death by crucifixion, a particularly brutal and humiliating form of execution reserved for political criminals and rebels. Furthermore, the fact that Jesus was not the only individual crucified by the Romans during this period suggests that his execution was not solely a religious matter, but rather part of a broader pattern of the Roman Empire suppressing any perceived challenges to its authority, whether political, social, or religious in nature. However, proponents of the prophetic interpretation would argue that even if the crucifixion had political motivations and consequences, it was nevertheless part of a larger divine plan that had been foretold and foreshadowed in the Old Testament. They would contend that the human actors involved, be they the Jewish religious leaders or the Roman authorities, were ultimately unwitting participants in the fulfillment of God's eternal purpose. From this perspective, the fact that the crucifixion was carried out by sinful and flawed human beings does not negate its status as a divinely ordained event. The biblical accounts, they would argue, present the crucifixion as the climactic moment in a cosmic drama of redemption that had been set in motion from the very beginning of time. Ultimately, the debate over whether the crucifixion was a prophetic event or a political plot comes down to one's underlying theological and hermeneutical assumptions. Those who hold a more traditional, supernatural view of the Bible and of God's active involvement in human history will naturally be inclined towards the prophetic interpretation. Those with a more skeptical or secularized perspective will be more drawn to the political explanation. It is worth noting, however, that these two interpretations are not necessarily mutually exclusive. It is possible to view the crucifixion as both a fulfillment of divine prophecy and a political event driven by the sinful machinations of human beings. After all, the biblical accounts themselves seem to acknowledge both the religious and the political dimensions of Jesus' death. For example, the Gospel of John records Pontius Pilate's declaration that he found no basis for a charge against Jesus, suggesting that the Roman authorities did not truly believe him to be a threat to their power. And yet, Pilate ultimately gave in to the demands of the Jewish religious leaders and ordered the crucifixion, perhaps out of political expediency or a desire to maintain social order. Similarly, the Gospels depict Jesus as fully aware of the divine necessity of his death, even as he agonizes over the cup of suffering that he must drink. In this sense, the crucifixion can be seen as both a preordained part of God's plan and a tragic consequence of the fallen human condition and the corrupting influence of power. Ultimately, the debate over the nature of the crucifixion is one that has raged for centuries and will likely continue to do so. It speaks to the deep and abiding significance of this event, not only for Christianity but for all of human civilization. Whether one sees the crucifixion as prophecy or political plot, or some combination of the two, it remains a profoundly important and thought-provoking subject of study and reflection. As we bring this video to a close, it is worth considering the broader implications of this debate. Regardless of one's theological or philosophical leanings, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ stands as a stark reminder of the complex interplay between divine providence and human agency, between the spiritual and the political, between the redemptive and the tragic. In a world that often seems beset by violence, oppression, and the abuse of power, the crucifixion serves as a sobering example of how even the most righteous and noble of causes can become entangled in the web of human sin and corruption. And yet, for billions of Christians, it also represents the ultimate triumph of love over hate, of forgiveness over retribution, and of hope over despair. Whether one views the crucifixion as prophecy or political plot, or some combination thereof, it remains a pivotal moment in human history, one that continues to shape our understanding of the divine, the human, and the very nature of salvation itself. As we grapple with these complex questions, may we find within them the wisdom and the inspiration to build a more just, compassionate, and redemptive world.